Hello, and welcome to Adapter Parish, episode 19, The Joy Luck Club. As always, before we get to today's episode, let's talk about our next episode. So, Independence Day is coming up, and here at Adapter Parish, we wanted to celebrate the holiday the best way we know how. Let's just say that there's one word you don't say unless you want a panic on your hands on the 4th of July. And that word is shark. That's right, we're going to be covering Peter Benchley's Jaws and the mildly popular movie that it inspired. Full warning, this is going to be one of those not safe for work, please wear your headphones episodes. You have been warned. On to your West Wing update. The Two Bartletts was not, in fact, a Mirror Mirror type episode, so other than that extreme disappointment, the show continues to be a delight. Except when Toby is a huge jerk to Laura Dern. I don't understand why anyone would be so mean to Laura Dern. It doesn't make any sense. I've got about 3 episodes left in Season 3, and I'm very excited to see how things go in Season 4. If you have any comments, questions, or corrections that you'd like to hear on the show, remember to email adaptorparishcast@gmail.com or tweet at us using the AdaptCast hashtag. And with that, on with the show. Amy Tan's The Joy Luck Club. Welcome to Adapter Parish, a podcast about adaptation. My name is Jeremy Latour.
And I'm Arielle Lipshaw. What are we going to talk about today?
We are talking about Amy Tan's The Joy Luck Club.
Ooh, The Joy Luck Club. This is very exciting for me because I have liked this book for a long time. Was this the first time you came to this? There's a book and a movie. And was this the first time you had read this book?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. And what was your experience?
My experience of reading the book?
Of reading the book, yeah.
My experience of reading the book, I was able to read it from beginning to end. Mm-hmm. I read the words.
Yes.
And then I was able to kind of conjure the story in my head.
That is
You're
reading.
talking about this book in particular or just reading in general?
No. It's a good question, and I understand that I was unclear when I said, what was your experience of reading this book? You were literally describing to me the experience of reading, and I apologize. Did you like this book?
I liked it a great deal.
Do you want to talk?
Do
you want to talk about how it made you feel?
I feel like this is a running theme on this show.
Mm-hmm.
Guess what this book did?
It made you laugh.
Sure.
It made you angry.
No.
What other emotions?
This book made Jeremy cry.
This has got to be we should do a segment. Someone suggested that we do a supercut of all the times we talk about Jeremy crying on the podcast.
This hits a number of buttons for me.
Mm-hmm.
Before we actually started doing it, you told me, "Oh, this has some triggers for you."
Yeah.
Such as?
Well, it has a lot about becoming your parents or not becoming your parents, and sort of that type of relationship. Although
becoming our parents despite our best efforts.
Yes, and it has a lot of sort of parents and children learning to understand each other. Yep.
I cried immediately.
And a lot.
No, actually, the funny thing about it is...
You cried so hard you gave yourself a migraine.
I only cried twice.
Okay.
I cried at the beginning.
Yep.
At the very beginning.
I got kind of teary-eyed at that story, too.
Yeah, like, it made me cry in pages 1 and 2,
yep.
And then it made me cry in the last 2 pages.
Yeah.
And a little bit before the end.
Yeah.
But basically, the way the book is set up, it's set up into 4 big sections, which has 4 small sections within each one. Mm-hmm. And at the beginning of each section, there's kind of a story.
Yep.
A 2-page, a 1 or 2 page story.
Like a parable almost, like a little tale.
Something very metaphor.
Yes.
The very first one made me cry.
Yeah.
Not so much because it itself made me cry, but because it was kind of showing me, oh, this is the type of book that I'm going to be reading. Oh, no.
Well, I said to you, because I have not read this book probably since I was in middle school, mm-hmm. But this copy here, you see, like, it's well worn. And I read that first 2 pages.
Your vintage movie tie-in mass market paperback.
Well, the movie was a long time ago. I read those first 2 pages, and I said, oh, I'm going to come to this with a much different experience because in the intervening years, I have started identifying not with the children in any given story, but with the parent. Mm-hmm. So that was a change for me.
Which is funny because now you're finally the age of the children.
That's right. Or younger, actually, still. Like,
yeah.
They're in their 30s, mm-hmm. Mid to late 30s. But we have not actually talked about what this book is about.
Do you think it's time for our new segment,
Yes.
Back of the Book?
Back of the book or
Would
back
you-
of the box.
Yeah. Would you like to do the honors?
Yes. I have here a copy of the Blu-ray, and I'm going to read. I'm not going to read. The first paragraph is just talking about what a Blu-ray is, so I'm not going to read that part.
Please, could you read that?
Oh, great. Sure, I will do that. Experience the uplifting motion picture produced by Academy Award winner Oliver Stone, Best Picture 1986 Platoon, and based on the powerful best-selling novel The Joy Luck Club for the first time on Blu-ray, featuring a new digital restoration with enhanced picture and sound. Okay, so far so good. We know that it's based on a book that was both powerful and best-selling.
And we know that Oliver Stone put his name on it.
Yes, produced. We don't know who directed it, but we know Oliver Stone produced. Okay, second paragraph. Revisit the inspirational story of four remarkable friends whose extraordinary lives are filled with joy and heartbreak. Their friendship reveals a mosaic of startling events that have shaped their lives and affects the hope they hold for their families. That sentence does not make sense. No,
No, their
that
lives.
is not grammatically
Wait, hang
correct.
on. Their lives affects.
No. A mosaic of startling events that affects the hope they hold for their families. If you that's what that sentence says.
Right, which is correct.
Events affects?
No, mosaic effects. It's one mosaic of multiple events, and the mosaic affects.
Okay, but it's a very confusing sentence. I will continue. A favorite of fans and critics alike, this exceptional film is sure to entertain you from beginning to end. Okay, a couple of things here.
Yes.
Did not Stephen King say the road to hell is paved with adjectives? Did he say adverbs?
I actually am not aware of that quote.
There's a lot of adjectives. Okay. Inspirational, remarkable, extraordinary, startling, exceptional. Those are the most. Okay, so I just read you that paragraph. What is this movie about?
It's about four friends. It's about 2 hours and 15 minutes long.
That it is literally the most generic.
So this segment is not doing. We introduced this segment to spend less time describing the plot.
Oh, God.
And all we've done is introduced a new segment to spend an hour talking
Talking about how
So,
bad this summary is.
executive decision. Give me that.
Okay.
Okay.
So that's
She's
that's
no
terrible.
longer holding the Blu-ray.
That was.
Let's try the book. Let's
Okay.
see if the vintage mass market
All right.
paperback
So this is a mass market paperback
can help.
with a movie with sort of a major motion picture thing. I'm gonna look and see. Copyright 1989. So it doesn't say what year this actual.
I'm assuming 93.
Yeah. This is clearly a movie tie-in. Okay. Amy Tan's brilliant novel flits in and out of many realities, but all of them contain mothers and daughters. Each story is a fascinating vignette, and together they weave the reader through a world where the Moon Lady can grant any wish, where a child, promised in marriage at 2 and delivered at 12, can, with cunning, free herself, where a rich man's concubine secures her daughter's fortune by killing herself, and where a woman can live on knowing she has lost her entire life. What is this book about?
Okay, we know a little bit more.
Still
It's-
not a lot.
One thing I will say, I don't think. Now I'm going to look at the Blu-ray. So at no point does the Blu-ray mention the name Amy Tan.
Amy Tan, the word China.
So that's good.
China would be important.
We know more about it.
I don't know.
It said that it was about different vignettes,
It said
right?
it was vignettes. It said mothers and daughters. That's a very important
Okay,
keyword.
we know who it's about. We know how it's structured.
We know it's a brilliant novel.
These are all very good.
And each one of those sentences is a thing that happens in the book.
That's true.
All of those things are true.
Mm-hmm.
And okay. And then there's a whole thing about it's just like the credits for the film. Hollywood Pictures
I don't
presents
think we
an
need to
Oliver
read
Stone
that.
production, a film by Wayne Wang.
Oh, good.
So, and then on the front it says beautifully written, a jewel of a book. So, do you
Excuse me, did you just read the front of the book and back of the book?
Yes.
This section is called Back of the Book.
There's a little quote
Executive
on the front.
decision. Give me that.
No, it's
Give
from
me
the
that.
New York Times book review.
You're done. Your privileges have been taken away.
Oh no. Okay,
Oh, the
so
spine is very interesting. Would you like to know how much this cost in Canada?
put it down.
Okay.
So here's my question for you.
Yes.
You have now read the book and seen the movie.
Sure have.
Had you not, what is this book about?
This book is about 4 women
Mm-hmm.
and then 4 other women.
Yes.
No, so basically it's loosely about 4 women who are now in their later years.
Yes.
They are all in their 60s or 70s. And this is all taking place in the 80s.
Yes.
And essentially, we hear about 8 people's stories.
Yes.
We hear several stories from 8 people's perspectives.
Yes.
We hear them.
7, because one of them is dead before the story begins.
She gets a section, though, doesn't she?
No. Not in her first person. The dad tells her story at the end.
Well, shit.
Yeah.
I'm going to say something here at the beginning.
Go ahead.
There's a lot going on in this book.
Mhm.
There's many characters. I may get confused at some point in the episode.
Yes.
I think you are less confused than me.
I've read the book multiple times.
So I hope that you will hold me accountable.
Yes.
But I just want to apologize in advance if anyone is offended that I get anything screwed up.
As long as we're doing disclaimers.
Oh, there's another big disclaimer.
There's another big disclaimer.
Please.
This book, all of the main characters, well, many of the main characters, half the main characters,
All of the main
characters are people of Chinese descent.
Mhm.
And as such, there are many references to names and places and even phrases that are in Mandarin or Cantonese. We do not speak either of those languages. We in an effort not to be actively disrespectful, we did a bare minimum of research to make sure that we were pronouncing the names of the main characters correctly.
I don't like your implication that we are passively disrespectful.
Yes.
We tried not to be disrespectful at all.
Yes. We have no intention of being disrespectful, but I do know that in Chinese, you can say something like mispronounce something and make it mean something very bad. So if we do that, we are sorry. If you are a listener, we do actually have friends and family who speak both Mandarin and Cantonese, and we did not consult them. We did not ask.
We talked about it.
We talked about doing it, but then we did not do it.
Yeah.
Sorry. I'm so sorry.
Disclaimer over.
Okay, great. Okay.
Getting back to the book.
Yes.
So there are 8 main characters, one of whom is not really a main character. Sorry, there's 7 main characters.
Oh boy.
3 moms
Mhm.
and 4 daughters.
Yes.
Because one of the moms is dead.
Right. When
She
the
has-
book begins, she has died.
And so essentially we hear all of these different vignettes from the first person perspectives of these 7 people,
Yes.
these 7 women.
Yeah. So the book takes place in sort of 3 different decades. It takes place in the present day, which is the 80s.
Mhm.
It takes place in the childhood of the younger women, which is the 60s.
And then it takes place far in the future of 2050.
No.
That'd be real cool.
No, honey. The sequel might. Maybe there's going to be a sequel.
Ooh, go on.
And then it takes place like in the teens and 20s and 30s in China.
Mhm.
Yes.
Yes.
That is what I have to say. So it jumps around in time and by narration because the whole book almost is in first person, but there's 7 different narrators, which
Yeah.
can get a little bit intense.
You know one thing I found out
Yes.
that I wasn't aware of?
No, go ahead.
So one of the things that plays into the book in a minor way is the game of mahjong,
Ah,
which maybe we'll get to the light anti-Semitism that
just light.
creeps up later in terms of how mahjong is talked about. But I did not know this because I don't really know anything about mahjong. But the book is structured around a mahjong game,
Mhm.
so it's structured in quarters. Each quarter is structured in quarters.
Which is the actual chapters and sections of the book.
Exactly.
Yes, very interesting.
So I did not know that.
That's very cool. I'm
Mhm.
glad you found that out. Okay, so here's what I would like to do.
Yes.
We're going to talk about the book.
Mhm.
I would like to spend a little more time than we usually do really kind of going through the plot and the characters
Mhm.
because I am not assuming that most people have read this book. And even when we've done things that we assumed everyone had read the book or seen the movie, we found that to be not true. So knowing that we're dealing with something that I think probably fewer people have read, although it was a New York Times bestseller, but a long time ago,
Mhm.
I am going to go through all of the characters. You cool with that?
I'm totally cool
Okay,
with
hang
that.
on. I'm going to pick up my notebook. I have written down phonetically name pronunciations. I'm very sorry. So basically, these are 4 older women with grown-up daughters. And all of them and all of their families have known each other since the mothers arrived in America, in the U.S. They all had these very different lives back in China, which we learn a lot about throughout the course of the book. But they all came to San Francisco in sort of the 20s and met each other and formed a group of friends called the Joy Luck Club. And so they have been meeting every week or every month for 30, 40 years at this point. And so all of their children grew up like siblings and all of their husbands know each other, but it's really centered around this group of 4 women.
Mm-hmm.
So at the point that the story begins, we're in the 80s. And the woman whose idea the Joy Luck Club initially was, she based it on a group of friends that she had back in China, that they would get together every week and feast and play mahjong during the war. Her name is Su Yun Wu. And at the beginning of the book, she actually has just died. She died about 4 months ago. And her daughter is telling the story. She's saying, my aunties have asked me to take my mother's place at the mahjong table at the Joy Luck Club. And that's how the book begins. What we learn about Su Yun is that all of these women had these like entire other lives back in China. And part of the narrative of the book is sort of the daughters coming to learn about what their mothers went through to provide them the lives that they've had, and sort of the things that have happened to them that are kind of beyond their understanding that have made them the way that they are. So Su Yun's big tragedy in her life was that she was married before. She was married in China. She had baby daughters, twin girls. And the city that she was living in, she was by herself. Her husband was in the army, and they were escaping. The Japanese were coming, and they were escaping. All she had was what she could carry, and she was very sick, and she was on foot, and eventually she had to abandon everything, including her children, by the time she got to where she was going. So this is something.
She literally leaves them on the side of the road.
She literally leaves them on the side of the road.
And we know this early on in the book, but we don't really understand the circumstances.
Right. We don't really understand that until the very end.
Because this particular chapter is being told from her daughter's perspective.
Right. And she always knew that there were daughters that she abandoned, and she kind of would sometimes, she talks about it, how as a child she used it as something to kind of hold over her mother's head, like saying, you didn't love those daughters, or and of course,
because kids can be shitty.
Yes. A lot of the book is adult children relating how they were shitty as children to their parents.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's shitty parents and shitty kids in this.
Yes.
But also wonderful kids and wonderful parents, because they're the same people.
Yeah, it's amazing how that works.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's what the story at the beginning is about, a swan feather, and it represents your good intentions. And a lot of the book is about good intentions, no matter how those are received.
So that's Su Yun.
Yes, that's Su Yun. And so June is her daughter. June is
What is June's real name?
Jing Mei. Mm-hmm. And but she goes by June. She goes by both. She is someone that she says, my mother said I had too much water because I drifted from here to there. I changed my major a bunch of times, and then I dropped out, and she became of college, exactly. And she became a copywriter, and she's not married, and she always just feels like she's disappointed her mother by the way that she's lived her life. She was an only child.
Yeah, one of like her big lines is, and I'm paraphrasing here, but it's essentially something along the lines of, she's saying this to her mom: "You always wanted me to be the greatest, and all I could ever be was me." Mm-hmm. And it's a big moment for them.
It's a big moment. June's story is that she learns shortly after her mother's death, a few months after, that her mother had been planning to go back to China again and try to find these daughters. Right after she died, her aunties, these other 3 women, got a letter saying, we found them. They're alive. They've been living in China ever since. They're not dead. They didn't die. And they write back as the mother, because they say we can't write and say she's dead. We can't bear to do it. And so they tell June, you're going to go to China and see your sisters. And oh, by the way, you have to tell them that your mother's dead. And so in the book, June says, there's no way that I can go to China with them expecting to see me and my mother. You have to tell them that she's dead. And of course, this all has to be done through the aunties, because June doesn't write Chinese. And then so at the end of the book, she goes with her father. They see some of his relatives that he hasn't seen in 50, 60 years. And she meets her sisters, and really it's a wonderful moment where she kind of learns about what her mother went through and what her relationship to her father is, and how that changes in her relationship to her culture and her heritage, and what it kind of means to be Chinese American.
And that's how the book ends.
That's how the book ends.
So the book begins with us finding out about June and her mother, and the book ends with her going back to China. And I only bring this up to say, this is the part that made me cry to the point of migraine.
Yeah, he literally, we were supposed to go see a show, and he came downstairs 5 minutes before we were going to leave and said, I can't go. I have the worst headache I've ever had. I feel nauseous. Like, I don't know what to do. And I was like, yeah, you have a migraine. You have been reading a book very closely and crying, and that will give anyone a headache. So anyway, I got to go see Tig Notaro with somebody else.
Yeah, whatever.
It was amazing.
Yeah, I'm sure it was. That's not what we're talking about.
No.
But bottom line, I would say we're going to talk, later about, is this book worth reading? I'm going to say it's absolutely worth reading, specifically for the first 2 pages and
Yes.
the last 2 pages.
Yes.
It's the hardest I've ever cried at a book.
Wow. That's saying a
It
lot.
it's incredible.
Yeah.
The moment where she meets her sisters is one of the best things I've ever read. It affected me more than almost anything I can think of.
Yeah.
And we will get back to that and how they handled it in the movie
Yes.
later.
Yes.
So that is Soo-yoon and June.
Okay. So, some more people to get through.
So that brings us to the next of the mothers,
Mhm.
An-mei Shu.
Yes.
Now, the story that we find out about her is that in her childhood, the thing that affected her, that she is sharing with her daughter,
Mhm.
is the fact that her mother was basically tricked into becoming the wife and a 4th wife and concubine for a rich Chinese man.
Right. Her mother was a widow of An-mei's father. So she was first wife and had An-mei, and then An-mei's father died.
Yeah.
Yes.
There's a lot of there's a huge amount in this book of this kind of cultural knowledge.
Yeah.
That is stuff that I wasn't super aware of and don't feel at this point comfortable kind of commenting on.
Right. There's a lot about sort of class in China at the time that I think the only thing I know about it is how the book describes it. So
Right.
like I feel like I'm not in a great position to say like, yes, that's how it was, or no, that's how it wasn't.
We can present the book as it was presented.
Exactly.
So her story essentially becomes when she was growing up, her mother wasn't there
Mm-hmm.
and she lived with her family and they all talked about how awful her mother was.
Right.
And she grew up believing her mother was terrible. And then her mother shows up one day and she's beautiful and she loves her.
Yes.
She has no reason to not love this
She
person.
shows up because her grandmother's dying.
Right.
Yeah.
Finally.
Yeah.
And she basically
Finally?
takes... Well, that was why she could come back.
Right.
Is because their grandmother who hated this grown woman
Right.
for what happened.
And the grandmother forgives her.
Well, she dies.
She does die.
Yeah. So they basically, An-mei is then taken back to this other family that her mother is living with.
The very rich family.
And her story really revolves around this kind of family structure where there's this man. He has his first wife, second wife, third wife, and fourth wife, which is her mother.
Yep.
And without getting into all the particulars of it, second wife is really kind of the antagonist of that whole story. And I don't want to give away all of the pieces of it because that's actually one of my favorite stories in the book.
It's a really good one.
I really, really liked
Yeah.
it. Essentially, it ends with her mother committing suicide.
Yep.
And she does it in a way that sets her daughter up for success with the family.
Right. So she does it. My understanding from the book,
Yep.
this could be an incorrect or incomplete understanding, but my understanding from the book is that there was a belief that on Chinese New Year, all the ghosts of the people that you had wronged would come back to you, and she timed her suicide to be 3 days before the new year, and that number of days was significant for a reason.
There's a lot of the book that plays
Yeah.
on people's superstitions.
Yeah, totally.
And belief structure.
Yeah.
And her situation kind of plays on that.
Yeah.
With the family.
Yeah.
But that's An-mei.
Yes, and so it's about An-mei's story that she sort of becomes independent, and her mother says she killed her own weak spirit so she could give An-mei a stronger spirit. So it's a really talk about a story about a mother and daughter, like
Yes.
amazing story.
Which we are.
Yes,
Yeah.
indeed.
And then we have Rose
Right.
Shu, who is An-mei's daughter.
Right. So Rose, like all the other daughters, was born and raised in the United States, and her relationship, like all of those daughters, towards sort of China and the old country was antagonistic or complicated, to say the least. So something we learned about the Shu family in the book is they had 7 children. And so it's like Rose had a bunch of little brothers and some sisters. And there's a story that Rose tells about how the family went to the beach so her father could fish, and she was supposed to be watching the little boys, and the youngest brother, like, who was about 4, wandered away and was lost. They think he was drowned. They never found him. And sort of how she began to understand her mother's strength of will, I guess, because basically her mother takes her back to the beach the next day and says and does sort of this ritual, like, we're gonna find him, and of course they never find him, but it's a way she kind of learns about her mother in this way, and sort of her mother's relationship to what she feels she can accomplish, which includes bringing people back from the dead.
Right. So that's her as a little girl.
As an adult, she marries a Caucasian man, an American. Of course, she's an American too, but he's a Caucasian American. They sort of have this sort of marriage where they married young, they met in college, and so he comes from a wealthy family. He becomes a doctor. They marry while he's in medical school, so she supports him, and she's a housewife and this and that, and basically supports him for years and years, and he becomes bored with her and decides he wants a divorce, and she's just kind of going to kind of fold over and give him everything.
Can I talk about a scene I really like?
Yeah, please.
Yeah, there's a scene where he basically says, "Yeah, we're going to sell the house. You know, the house that we have together, we're going to sell it."
Mhm.
And she has this kind of revelatory set of things that happens, and he comes to her and she says, she's very matter of fact about it. She says, "Oh, well, I'm keeping the house.
Mhm.
This is my house. I'm not going to leave this house, so I'm keeping it."
Yeah.
And she's real fucking badass.
Yeah.
In that moment.
At the end, well, she has this conversation. Her mother tells her the whole story of her life, and then she kind of comes into her own a little bit.
It's a really good moment.
It's great.
I like that.
Yeah.
So that brings us to Ying Ying St. Clair.
Ying Ying St. Clair. So I'll talk about Ying Ying, and then you can talk about who her daughter is.
Sure.
Okay. So Ying Ying June describes Auntie Ying Ying at the beginning of the book. She says Auntie Ying Ying has always been the weird auntie. Like, she's the one that just kind of says random things at random times and just sits there knitting. Like, I just kind of pictured her as like this tiny old crone in the corner.
Mm-hmm.
Which is different from how she's portrayed in the movie, but we'll come to that.
Yes.
So Ying Ying, we're given to understand, had a very different upbringing from the rest of the older women because her family was wealthy. Her family was in society.
Just to recap really quickly,
Yeah.
Su Yun seemed to be very middle class.
Yep. Well, she was like army class. She was married to an army officer.
Right. Anmei, I think, was more lower class.
Her family seemed middle class, but of course
More middle. No, they are more middle class.
But of course, her mother's situation brought her. She was living in a rich household, but her mother had very little honor as fourth wife. It's all very complicated.
Yeah, I mean that's one of the things that I think is important to say is that none of their lives are presented in one way. None of them are one class and stay in that class.
Right.
They're all one class and then interact with different classes.
Well, exactly, and it's all about these 4 women are particularly amazing as far as
being like a cross section.
Well, yes, that's not what I meant, but yes.
Oh, sorry.
But what I meant was more in terms of choosing what they wanted their lives to be.
Sure. Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. And making that happen.
Mm-hmm.
So Ying Ying was a 16-year-old girl in a rich family, and she is at a cousin's wedding or something. She meets this horrible man who we in the book is described as just like old and he's her uncle, I think. I think he's related to her.
Mm-hmm. But they get married.
Because that's what you do, I guess. And she realizes immediately that he is a very bad man. And so, like, one of the things her daughter says later is, like, my mother always told me she was married to a bad man in China. And that was the only thing I ever knew about what life was like in China. And he's cheating on her ridiculously so, and then leaves her for an opera singer, and she has to hear about it from somebody else. She's still only like 18
while she
is pregante.
With baby.
Yes. So she has an abortion,
Mm-hmm.
which in the book she says that was not a bad thing to do in China back then. Like, she says that was a pretty normal thing to do. And she goes to live with some family in the countryside to kind of wait out the war, and she says, I was a ghost for 10 years. And then at the end of that time, she kind of pulls herself together. She goes to work at a department store, and there she meets the man who would be her second husband, who is an American, a Caucasian American, and they go back to San Francisco to live. And they have a daughter, Lena,
Mm-hmm.
who you're going to talk about.
Yeah. So Lena's whole story really revolves around her marriage to a man who is an architect. They both work in an architecture firm. They worked in a bigger one.
And he went to start his own firm, so he's a partner.
Because at her behest. She
Right.
says, you should start
You're
your own
so
firm.
good. You're so amazing,
Yeah.
babe.
And their relationship is really an example of kind of relationships that are out of balance.
Yes.
Where he makes 7 times what she makes. But he insists on splitting everything equally.
Yeah, so they have this like running tally of like, I bought cat food, but you bought this and that.
Yeah, so when they like go out to eat, they have to split everything. And he just is oblivious.
Yes.
And he's not really like a bad guy. He's bad in that he has no idea what's going on in his life.
Right.
He has no idea what's going on with his wife that he loves. And their marriage is kind of falling apart and he's completely unaware of it.
Right. And I will say, as someone who, in between my previous last reading of this book and now, has dated and been in relationships and been married, this made me angrier than anything else in the entire book.
Yeah.
Like, never mind the Japanese invading China, never mind women, being forced to have abortions because their husbands were so terrible, never mind like women being forced to marry against their will. The idea of someone who is in such a more stable position of money saying, I'm going to have a steak and 6 scotches and you had a salad, but we're going to split the bill down the middle, and tallying up every single individual thing and owing each other money. And like that made me angrier than anything else in the entire book, because it's like the difference between equity and equality, right? So like equality is everyone is exactly the same. Equity is everyone puts in according to their means. So that made me very mad.
Yep. It's like a whole thing with ice cream where he keeps making them split ice cream, and her mother goes, well, you don't even like ice cream. She doesn't even eat it.
Yeah.
And he's like, what are you talking about? I thought you were just always on a diet.
And like, it's this amazing moment of like how, oh, you don't see me. Like I've paid for half of your ice cream our entire marriage and never had one spoonful. And you just assumed that was fine.
Mm-hmm. And balance is really the ongoing theme of their entire story.
Yeah.
And it's kind of, I mentioned balance at the beginning, and I'll bring it back to the central physical metaphor of their relationship, which is her mother comes to stay at their house, which her mother hates because it's very modern architecturally,
right? And
she doesn't like it. And essentially in the guest bedroom, there is an end table that he built at one point when he was in school.
He was like in architecture school, so it's got sentimental value. And
it's a piece of shit table that doesn't really stand up too well because it doesn't balance, and it has a big glass vase on it.
Yeah, with one flower.
And her mother goes like, well, why would you even have this if it's just going to fall over? And basically the way their whole story ends is she and her husband are having a fight about this, and they hear a crash from up in the guest room, and she goes up and the table has fallen over, and the vase is broken, and her mother is just looking out the window. And there's the line, I think you can say it better than me.
Yeah, they have this amazing exchange. She goes to pick up the broken glass, and she says, it doesn't matter. I knew this would happen. And her mother says, why didn't you stop it? And that's the end of the chapter.
Yep.
It's so good.
It's really, really good.
If you knew things would fall apart, why didn't you stop it?
Mm-hmm. I mean, it's very clear that, to me at least, that the mom pushed it over intentionally.
Oh, really?
Oh, yeah. That's how I read it.
Oh, like, I didn't read it that way at all, but like that's really interesting.
I think she's trying to help her daughter get to a conclusion a little early.
Okay.
I think she's trying to push the correct conclusion.
Listen, babe, I buy it.
Yeah.
I buy it. So I would love for you to talk about your favorite character, and that was Lindo Zhang.
Lindo Zhang is both my favorite and least favorite character. I'm going to say this. I think she's the most engaging character in the book.
She's great.
So her story basically revolves around the fact that when she was 2 years old, she was betrothed by a matchmaker.
Yes.
She
matchmaker.
She was very low class.
A match.
She was very low class, and she was betrothed to someone who was higher class.
Yes.
So growing up, she always knew this was going to happen, and we see the story from her perspective, and we see her marriage and the first bit of time of her married life.
Right.
And parts of this I don't want to spoil because it's really entertaining.
Right. To be clear, though, I just want to be clear about one thing. Mm-hmm. Her married life began when she was 12 years old.
Right. And he was also 12 years old.
Yeah, like 11 or 12.
They're both children.
Yeah.
But there's stuff about it I don't want to spoil.
Yeah.
Because it's very interesting and entertaining. But it's basically her telling the story of that first period of time being married.
Right.
And her mother-in-law she has to go live with them. Her mother-in-law is terrible. Her husband is terrible. And it's the story of her using her wits to get out of that situation.
It's amazing.
She basically forges her own path and makes her own destiny.
Yeah.
And there's one part of her story that I actually don't want to spoil.
Okay. All right. I think you should, though, because otherwise people
Okay.
are not going to go read the book because
So
of this.
part of the wedding ceremony is a candle
Right.
that is burning at both ends to represent both of the two people.
Right.
And someone has to watch the candle until it burns out. Because if the candle goes out, then that means that their love is not true or their life is not
Their marriage
destined.
won't last.
Their marriage won't last, basically. And one of the things we find out later in her story is that night she found herself alone. The night of the marriage, she found herself alone with the candle and blows it out.
Amazing.
And the next morning finds out that no one said anything
Right. to be
because someone was
clear-
in charge of watching it.
Right. And to be clear, though, like, doesn't blow it out of a spirit of, like, fun. Like, she truly believes in it. And in the book, she says, I waited for, like, the thunder to roll or the lightning to come and strike me dead. Like, she truly thinks something awful is going to happen, but she would prefer that to being married to this guy for the rest of her life.
Yeah. And so that's something that she uses to her advantage later
Yeah.
when she is trying to kind of get herself out of the
Yeah,
situation.
the way that she gets herself out of the situation is amazing, and I actually agree with you not spoiling it because it's like such a cool thing for a child to kind of come up with. I mean, she was like 16 by then, but yeah,
She basically, the fact that we find out that she is this incredibly interesting, fiercely independent person makes us like her when she's terrible later.
right, that's right.
Because one of the people she's terrible to
Is her daughter.
Waverly,
Right.
Who probably is the closest thing that this entire book has to a villain. That's not how this book is set up at all.
I mean,
But-
except for like all the men back in China.
Yeah, but they're just she's throughout the entire book.
Right.
She's one character who's in the entire thing. Because I would say the primary protagonist, even though they're all protagonists, the primary one is June.
That's right.
And June perceives Waverly, Lindo's daughter, as her primary antagonist.
Yes, she's
which
her
makes
nemesis.
her the primary antagonist of
Right.
the book. But she is she's ridiculous. She is every joke that has ever been made about like a demanding mother-in-law or mother. But we see how demanding she is through the eyes of Waverly,
Right.
her daughter, who is the last main character we are going to talk about.
I'm going to talk about Waverly. So Waverly Zhang was named after the street they lived on, Waverly Place in San Francisco.
Mhm.
She was given a chessboard at a Christmas party at church and sort of taught herself how to play chess and started playing chess with the old men in the park and became a chess prodigy. Sort of taught herself. She was Waverly Zhang, Chinatown's tiny chess prodigy.
She was like on the cover of magazines.
She was
stuff
on the
like
cover
that.
of Life magazine. Like she was not a grandmaster, but she was like almost to that status, and she was only like 8 or 10 years old. And she basically saw herself. Her sense of self-importance was very inflated because of she was not humble. We'll put it that way.
No, not even a little.
And there's a vignette where she gets really embarrassed because her mother is kind of dragging her around Chinatown, bragging on her, saying, this is my daughter, Waverly Zhang. She's on the cover of Life magazine. She's so amazing. And she's saying, like, I don't know why you're using me to show off. You should learn to play chess if you want to be special. She just is she just seems very spoiled and selfish, and that continues into her adulthood. But we learn when Waverly is the narrator that she also feels like she can never please her mother. She married a Chinese boy to please her mother and had a baby, and then they got divorced. And now she's dating this guy, Rich, this Caucasian guy who loves her 4-year-old daughter. And a lot of the story of Waverly and her mother, Lindo, is around how Lindo feels about the fact that her daughter is marrying this guy, this Irish American guy, Rich.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, that's basically her story.
Yeah.
I would say of all of them, she probably has the smallest story, but I think she's one of the biggest characters.
Well, she's really annoying, so.
Yeah, she has a lot of character,
Right.
and so we don't need to hear as much about her life.
Right.
But kind of like with Lindo, the fact that we know how hard it was being Lindo's daughter
Yes.
helps her not be this two-dimensional villain, because she is a jerk.
Yes.
She's a really big jerk, and there's a really good scene where she and June kind of go at each other, which I don't want to say word for word.
Yeah.
But they basically go at each other, and it's a scene that eats at me because of how frustrated it makes me at one of the characters in it. It's very uncomfortable.
Right. But it's like, you are the daughter of someone who, I mean, talk about like she talks about like chess strategy, right? Like what her mother, she got that from her mother. Like the story that her mother tells about how she extricated herself from this household was literally like a game of chess. She's like moving the pieces. She's like, okay, I'm going to set this thing up here, and I'm going to set this thing up here and this thing, and I'm going to bring everything together and make it work so that I can get out of this house.
Yeah.
That was a connection I did not make until this moment, but her mother is also a chess champion.
Yeah.
In her own way.
Yeah. Oh, you didn't make that connection?
I did just now.
Oh, yeah. No, that's a big part.
Strategy, right? Strategy.
I think that's everybody. Did you have anything else you wanted to say about them?
No, I feel like I said we were going to do like 15 minutes on the characters. I feel like we've done an hour.
We've done more than 15 minutes, so let's get to the movie.
Okay, great.
So I've got
wait. Before we get to the movie.
Okay.
I have to ask you our question that we always ask each other.
Yes.
Did you like this book?
Yes, I liked it so much.
Yes.
I really, really liked it.
It's a really good book. It's extremely well written.
This is a rare book where I'm going to recommend that people read it, but I'm also going to recommend that people read it in a very specific way. I would not read more than one vignette in a sitting.
Interesting.
I really think this book should be read over the course of 16 sittings, one vignette per sitting.
Because it's almost like short stories, right?
Yeah.
And in fact, like some of the later vignettes, like they talk about events that you read about in earlier vignettes as if you didn't have that information. Like it kind of reintroduces that information that you kind of already have if you've just sat down and read it all the way through.
Yeah, I think the book, one quibble I have, which isn't really that big, is that the book runs the risk of everything kind of merging together. And I got a little confused in reading it because I think I tried to read it too fast. So I would recommend reading it in separate sittings. But it is a great book, and I really, really liked it. It is a really good book.
Like it's one of those books that like I feel like a lot of people have heard of. I don't know if it's as popular now as it used to be. It certainly was like a bestseller when it came out. But it definitely holds up. It's a really good book, and it's not super long. It's a good read, and it's very engaging, and I would definitely recommend it.
I agree.
Yeah. So they made a movie out of this book.
They did. So let me give a little background on this.
Yeah, I would love to hear it.
So in the late 80s, when this book came out, there was a director named Wayne Wang. He had already directed several movies about Chinese Americans. He really liked this book, and he went to Amy Tan and said, we should make a movie.
Ooh.
And it took them several years to kind of get everything together. Now, one thing that they figured out in the first year is that they did not quite know how to write the screenplay for this.
Okay.
So they brought on a guy named Ronald Bass, and he had some ideas, which we will get to in a little bit.
Cool.
So they wrote the screenplay together. She is one of the credited screenplay writers.
Yes.
That's not how that is. She is one of
screenwriters.
She is one of the credited screenwriters on this. Then, over the course of like 1990 to 1993, getting close to production, the biggest kind of thing that happened in the production of it is that Oliver Stone and Janet Yang were brought on, who were producing partners. And one of the things that I found is that Wang and Stone were kind of antagonistic toward each other in the past and had to get over that for the movie because basically Wang had previously criticized portrayals of Chinese people in Oliver Stone's Year of the Dragon. And Stone said that Wang's movie Dim Sum, A Little Bit of Heart, was boring because it lacked action. They made up.
I can see a world where both of those things are true.
Yep.
Just from watching this movie.
Kind of going into this, I will say I don't have some big love of Oliver Stone nor a love of Wayne Wang. So it's just these two guys are kind of interesting.
Two dudes.
So
directing some ladies.
A number of things that are notable about this is this is one of the first movies, if not the first major American movie, to feature an almost entire Asian American cast.
Oh yeah, that doesn't surprise me at all.
So that was very, very big. They made it for like $10 million and it made like 35. It was a big movie. It was very popular for this type of movie, for this kind of family drama. But that's kind of what brought us to the movie being released in 1993.
Yes.
And that brings us to the movie itself, which I had never seen before.
I had seen it and remembered liking it.
When was that?
I was probably in high school.
Okay.
I'm sure I'd only seen it the one time.
So that was 20 years ago.
Great. Thank you for saying that. Yes, it was.
You're welcome.
Great.
So now you've watched it again, and I watched it with you.
Yes.
Now, we have had an experience in the past where we have watched a movie together where I have been a little nervous watching it because I actively don't like it, and I'm worried that you really like it and that we will have a disagreement.
Yes, that's true.
And
that
so
has happened before.
About 30 minutes into this movie, I had a lot of problems with it, but I didn't say any of them. And then you just it doesn't even matter what it was.
No, I remember specifically, and I
What
want to
was
say
it?
it because it was really funny.
What was it?
There was a scene that was very emotional,
Mm-hmm.
and I was getting kind of teary-eyed. And I think you were maybe getting a little teary-eyed too. And then something happened, and my reaction was to turn to you and say, "Why did they ADR this?" And you went, "Oh my God, babe, I've never been so proud of you."
I had so many problems with this
You
movie.
ruined me for movie watching because but when we met, I did not know what ADR was. B, could not identify it on screen. Now, every time I see it, I go, "Oh God, why did they ADR this?"
Mhm. I'm just going to give a quick thing about what ADR is.
Please do,
for-
because I
for our
feel like
listeners.
this is like my one piece of movie jargon that I know.
So ADR is called automated dialogue replacement. It's, let's say you're recording on set and you have a microphone there and you find out later that there was a really bad problem with the sound. So what you need to do is you can't reshoot it. So you just have to re-record the dialogue.
Yep.
So you got to bring the actors into a studio in a completely different environment than they originally shot it in. Maybe they're not emotionally in the same place, and they have to try to get it to sound like it did on set.
They have to kind of match the lips to the thing. And you would do that legitimately, like if it was like a crowd scene
Oh,
or
sure.
something very dramatic. But like sometimes you do it, sometimes you see it in like a very intense like one-on-one scene, and it's like it stands out. It looks very odd.
It's one of those things when it's done well, you don't even know they did it.
Yes.
And when it's done badly, it's very obvious.
Much like plastic surgery.
Sure.
It kind of is plastic surgery of movies.
The look that I'm getting right now is like you said something amazing. It's okay. Sure. All right.
Wow. Wow.
Yeah. They made it. They changed a thing.
Okay.
But anyway, it's now a thing that you're aware of because I've been pointing it out to you.
Correct.
So I've ruined movies for my wife, which I'm very happy about.
That's okay. I am happy to ruin theater for you anytime.
I appreciate that.
Thank you. It's ruined for me forever because I have an MFA
Oh, poor sweetie.
from Columbia.
So we get to the movie. I just want to talk about some things I liked about it.
Yeah.
First of all, there are a number of people in the cast who I think are great.
Yes.
So who did I say was my favorite person in this movie?
Your favorite person, coincidentally, also your favorite character, Lindo Zhang.
Yeah, she's played by an actress named Chai Chin.
Okay.
I believe I am pronouncing that correctly.
Okay, I hope so.
I hope so. We gave a thing at the beginning.
It
I
was
shouldn't have to say this every
disclaimer.
time.
We just a disclaimer.
Yeah. She, I think, is one of the best actors in the entire movie.
Oh, she's amazing.
She's great. She's really funny and really engaging and heartbreaking when she needs to be. She's very good.
Yes.
She's very good. I like her quite a bit in this. Were there any people who stood out to you in the cast? So let me ask this a different way. Was there anyone in the cast that you were surprised to find out how much you liked in this movie?
Indeed, yes.
Who is that?
There is an actress whose name is Rosalind Chow. Am I saying that right?
I believe so.
Okay, great.
Rosalind?
Well, Rosalind, yes. Chow, I'm just checking.
Yeah.
And she is an actress that you and I both know from her role on two different Star Trek series. One, Next Generation, and two, Deep Space Nine, where she plays Keiko O'Brien, the wife of Miles O'Brien. And we hate her
Yeah.
because she's the worst.
Keiko's the worst.
And it's not her fault that she's the worst. She is written to be the worst.
Oh, yeah.
And
But you kind of can't. Unfortunately, sometimes you end up putting a lot of that on the actor.
Well, I was never sure how much. I feel like this is kind of like the Will Wheaton problem. I was never sure how much of it was her acting and how much of it was the fact that the writers were giving her very little. And I knew both of those things were true somewhat. But she has a scene in the movie. She plays Rose. And there was a point in the movie where she has this scene where she's like sitting in the rain and she's giving this kind of monologue, and it's very dramatic and it's very emotional. And I turned to you and I went, "Oh, Keiko's not her fault."
Yep.
And you were like, "Yeah, I never thought it was." And I was like, "Well, I did."
I
So
think she's really, really good in this
Yeah.
movie. She's my favorite of the daughters.
Yeah.
I think Tsai Chin is my favorite of the moms, and
Yeah, yeah.
and Rosalind Chow is my favorite of the daughters.
Mhm.
There were a couple other people who like popped up that I really enjoyed.
Andrew McCarthy.
Yeah, Andrew McCarthy's
It was
in it.
really funny when you watch the credits for this movie. It's all of these like Chinese actors and Asian actors, like all different names of different ethnicities, and then like you get down towards the bottom and it's Andrew McCarthy. It was pretty funny.
Mhm. But there's so many actors in it because so many of the characters have to be played at different ages.
Mhm.
One of the things that we talked about is that the moms have to play both like in their 60s and in their 30s.
Yeah, like they use the same actors to play like the young mothers and the old mothers.
And we had a whole conversation where I think you said, do you think they were thinking about the fact that like it's okay that they're older playing younger characters because it's so subjective from the perspective of their daughters?
Yeah, I thought it was maybe like a very artistic choice, and you were like, no, they just didn't want to pay another set of actors.
I literally think it's just a logistics thing. I don't think they could have done that. I think we have to talk about Ming Na.
Yeah.
Ming Na Wen plays June.
Yes.
Who is coming out of the book, I really felt like June was the main character.
Yeah,
I felt
yeah.
like she was the closest to Amy Tan.
Totally.
And she is definitely the main character of the movie.
She is sort of the way in for the audience.
Yeah. So Ming Na Wen is someone who I like a great deal.
And she just goes by Ming Na now.
Yes.
If I'm not mistaken.
Yes.
Just she's a one name person, but at this point she still had a last name.
Right. She's someone I like a great deal. She's been in things that I really, really like.
Yeah.
And I think she's very good.
Isn't she in Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D.?
Yes, she is.
Yeah.
She is in Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. She plays Melinda May.
Mm-hmm. I believe she was on ER as well.
She was.
Yes.
Do you know what her name was on ER?
Her character's name?
Yeah.
I don't remember.
I think it's Jing Mei.
Oh, really?
Hang on, I got to find that really quick. So yes, she appeared on 118 episodes of ER as Jing Mei Chen.
Yes.
So
yes. She was a medical student, I believe, who
And-
became like a resident.
So she was Jing Mei in both.
That's funny.
So I was very excited to see her in this
Mhm.
because she is an actress I like a great deal. Much as we found out that Keiko was not Rosalind Chow's fault,
Right.
I do not think that June, as portrayed in this movie, is Ming Na's fault.
No. And the funny thing is I was mistaken because for some reason I thought she was only like 19 or 20 when she made this movie and she was like 30.
Mm-hmm.
So I feel like the things that I was forgiving her for, I felt less forgiving of because she was much older than I thought she was.
Yeah. I'm going to say this. I think it is reductive to say whether someone was good or bad
Yes.
in something.
Yes, because there's so many things that go into an actor's performance.
I do not think this was a good performance.
No, it's not great.
I do not blame her.
No. Anything that is not a good performance, I do not blame the actors one bit for reasons that we're going to talk about.
In this particular movie?
Oh, yeah.
I thought you meant in general.
Oh, God, no. No. I literally just meant in this movie.
Sometimes I do blame the actor.
Oh, yeah, I blame the actors many, many times, but not in this movie.
Not here. I think there's a bigger thing that's going on, which is that, which we'll get to in a minute, this movie has a lot of very kind of flat performances.
Yes.
And hers is one of the most notable
Mm-hmm.
in that she is ostensibly the main character.
Right.
In a movie with no one main character,
Right.
she's probably closest to what we have. And her performance is extremely flat.
Yes.
I have a very hard time kind of not identifying. I have a really hard time making a connection with her character in this movie.
Right.
Whereas I did not have a problem with that at all in the book.
Right.
At all.
Right.
So is there anyone else in the cast you'd like to mention?
There's no particular person in the cast.
Mhm.
I mean, the people I'm going to talk about are in the cast. But what I would like to say, just as we're talking about things we enjoyed or liked, they clearly went out of their way. There are many, many children, sort of from baby 0 to like 5 in this movie. They did such a good job finding the cutest fucking children.
They were really cute.
One cuter than the next. So many cute children and babies. Baby Lindo, like 2 to 3 year old Lindo, was the cutest. There's I won't spoil the plot line, but there's a baby that like appears in one of the like old scenes in China that is the cutest baby I've ever seen. The cutest children. Now, once you get to the children who were like 8 or 10 and the director was directing them and they actually had lines, less cute because he did not get great performances out of those child actors.
Yeah.
But the little children that were just on screen to be babies and little children were, as I say, one cuter than the next. Very adorable, fun to watch.
I agree wholeheartedly. So as far as casting goes,
Yes.
I actually think they did a fantastic job casting.
Hmm.
I think they did not do a good job for the actors they cast after casting.
I agree with you.
So that brings us to, really quickly before we go on, Sir not appearing in this film.
Go for it.
I think we have 2 nominees for this.
Yeah.
I want to go with the one that I am most interested in, which is a white guy who is Mr. St. Clair,
Okay.
Ying Ying's husband.
Yes.
He's a character in it. His death is part of Lena's story. He does not appear in this movie at all. He has died well before this movie started.
No, and not only does he not appear in this film, but there is no indication whatsoever that Lena's father is Caucasian, which is important for her story because, like, unlike the other women who are very obviously Chinese in their appearance, she talks a lot about how, like, oh, people say I'm exotic, like, it's in quotes exotic, like, I know that's a very problematic word to use, but like she talks about how her appearance is unusual because she's of mixed descent, and that is not in the movie whatsoever, and it's something that informs her character in the book that's just not there in the movie at all.
So he's my nominee for that, but you had a nominee as well.
Yes. I feel like I would have loved to see more of Rose's story because the only thing that we know about her from the movie is that she got involved with this rich guy in college from a rich family, and then she was bad at making decisions, and then he decided that he wanted a divorce. And one of the things we know about her from the book is that she has 6 brothers and sisters, and that one of her brothers drowned really tragically. So, and that, again, is something that really informs her character that we don't see in the movie. So my Sir not appearing in this film is Bing Shu, the little 4-year-old boy that is Rose's brother who drowns. That is a very important part of her story.
I would actually say, in retrospect, that is the more important Sir not appearing in this film.
Oh, good.
This little child is Sir not appearing in this film.
Great.
So that brings us to another aspect of this movie.
Yeah.
And I would say it's probably one of the major overall problems that I had. And it's kind of with pace.
Yeah.
And editing and Wayne Wang's overall direction.
Yeah. So how long was this movie?
This movie is 2 hours and 15 minutes.
Which is too many minutes.
Too many minutes for what was on screen.
Yeah.
I could see a version of this movie being 2 hours and 15 minutes, but not this version of it.
Not this version. You could have taken those 15 minutes, cut down a bunch of pauses and weird camera lingers, and put in another 1 or 2 of those vignettes that didn't make it out of the book into the movie.
I think this is just on its face a very poorly constructed movie.
Yeah.
And I feel really bad. Now we're getting into it. I feel bad saying that I did not like this movie because it is a very important movie.
We wanted to like it.
Oh, I absolutely went in wanting to like it.
And my memory of watching it was positive when I watched it in the past. And we really wanted to like it. And I can't emphasize enough how impressive it is that it was made at all.
Oh, sure.
You know what I mean? With a predominantly female, non-white cast. That's amazing. Like, that was amazing that it was as mainstream as it was.
Yeah, in retrospect, I'd rather we get the movie we got than not getting it at all.
I agree with that completely. Like, it's better that it was made like this than not made at all. But it's just a shame that it wasn't made better.
Yeah, it's a shame that we got this version of it.
So would you want to talk about the pacing?
It's such a problem.
It's very slow.
There's one scene in particular that I'm thinking of that is staged and edited and shot so poorly. And it's a scene kind of near the beginning where June, is talking to her aunties.
Yeah.
And there's never, it's a really bad, it's at like a church picnic, and there's a group of people and a weird saxophonist.
It's really strange.
There's a group of people and a really weird saxophonist in the background. It's just, this is where I get annoying and nitpicky, and I apologize for that in advance.
Go for it.
But it's basically, we get a shot of June, a shot of Lindo, and then a shot of Anmei and Ying Ying together.
Sort of grouped. A lot of the staging makes it seem like a stage play.
Yeah. But there's never a shot of all of them.
Yeah.
We never, like, basically suddenly we're in a park and June's there talking to someone.
The camera.
And then we find out, oh, it's Lindo that she's talking to. She's there with Lindo because now we have a shot of Lindo. And then suddenly Lindo refers to people next to her and we look over, oh, and it's Anmei and Ying Ying
Sort
are
of
there
grouped
next to her.
together.
It's very, very poorly done.
It's very odd.
And maybe they were really rushed that day and they couldn't get what they needed. And maybe there was a master shot. Maybe it was, there's all of these maybes. Bottom line, if it was only that scene, I wouldn't even be talking about it.
But it happens so many times.
Throughout the entire movie, so many scenes are poorly shot, poorly staged, and very poorly edited. There's a one last thing that I'm thinking of. I say one last, I'll probably think of another one. But there's a framing device in the movie where the movie begins and ends just before the end. The movie basically begins and ends with the goodbye party for June before she leaves for China to meet her sisters.
Right.
And there's a scene at the end, near the end, where she is talking to the other daughters.
Mm-hmm.
And it's this tableau where they're all staged as if in a stage play.
Right.
And it's just the daughters and a couple of the husbands there, and they're all talking to each other, and it's just very poorly directed.
It looks like The Last Supper.
Yeah, it's the acting
Like-
is very flat.
Like there's sort of a fourth wall
Mhm.
and they're all kind of grouped around it, just like you would just like you would say to someone, okay, cheat out, you know, on stage. And there's a number of shots that are set up that way throughout the movie.
But then there's the second part where we don't know that the aunties are all there as well.
Right.
And then suddenly June turns to the edge of the frame and starts addressing them, and the camera moves out and they're all standing
Yeah.
there. It's one of the most awkward things I've seen.
There's a number of shots in the movie, like the scene where Waverly and Lindo are in the like the beauty parlor. They're sort of both talking into the camera because it's supposed to be the mirror that Lindo's sitting in the chair to get her hair done.
Yeah,
and
they're both talking into the mirror, but the camera is at that
the
angle.
camera is at the mirror. But then there's another scene that shot exactly the same, like sort of two women grouped around a camera, but they're not talking into a mirror. They're both just kind of facing out when Rose and her mother are talking.
Mhm.
And I almost wonder if he's like, okay, well, I'm going to set the shot up the same so you can see the parallels. But it's very odd. It's not natural. Like it does not look like natural behavior. You're raising your hand.
There is something that happens throughout this entire movie that is so frustrating, where characters just look out into the middle distance in thought. We'll get to what they're thinking in a second.
Right.
But they're constantly doing this. And it's a weird movie where I think one of my biggest problems with the direction of it is that the movie is not naturalistic at all.
Yeah.
And one of the things I like about a book is that, and we talked about this before, we talked about it in The Fault in Our Stars especially, which is when you read a book, to me the implication is never, this is all and only that happened,
Right.
is what is written here.
Right.
What a book does is it says, these are things that happened, and then your brain fills in all of the cracks.
Right.
Your brain fleshes everything out and makes it more real. In a movie, though, what you are presenting is what happens. You can't really flesh it out. So if you just do what's in the book, it makes everybody seem very unnatural.
Yeah.
Very, very unnatural.
Yeah.
And in this movie, I think, and this is an opinion, I think this is a story that could have benefited from a more naturalistic approach, treating these like real people.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
I want to make a connection with them, but it's so theatrical and it's so stilted and so unnatural that I feel like I'm watching a play. I never feel like I'm watching people.
Yeah. And again, like I think it is such an important movie
Yes.
that I almost feel bad criticizing it because
I absolutely
not-
feel bad criticizing it.
I really do, because it's not for nothing that they were able to make it at all.
Mhm.
And I almost feel like, you know, you were talking about like, oh, you know, the early 90s there was a real boom in art house movies.
Kind of quote unquote art house movies.
Yeah. I almost feel like it couldn't be made today. Like people would say, oh no, we couldn't possibly make this movie that doesn't have any male leads and no white people, you know?
100%. If you tried to make this today, they would say, you're talking about a TV show though, right?
Yeah.
You're not talking about a theatrical movie.
Which actually would be really interesting as a TV show, because you
Yes.
could spend so much time on all of the stories. Everyone could just be an episode. That would be really neat.
Yeah.
Yeah. Hulu should pick this up.
Yeah, I feel like this type of movie doesn't get made anymore.
Yeah.
This kind of mid-budget $10 to $30 million movie, they don't
like,
get made.
Like family drama, like The Myth of Fingerprints. Remember that movie?
No.
What? With Noah Wyle?
What?
Like
No. No, you're thinking about ER.
No, incorrect. That's a television show. We
Was
just
Noah
talked
Wyle
about
in
that.
something other than ER?
Oh boy. Okay.
He played Steve Jobs that one time.
Moving on. What else? There was like one other thing, right, that we wanted to talk about. Sort of the elephant in the room about this movie.
Okay.
Do you want to
So-
introduce it, or do you want me to?
I want to go back for a second.
Yeah. Go ahead.
I'm going to give some background, and then I know you have something to say.
Yep.
I want to talk about Ronald Bass.
Okay.
So Ronald Bass is the screenwriter that they brought in to help write this movie because Wayne Wang and Amy Tan felt they needed help. When they brought Ronald Bass in, he made two big changes. Now, one change that he made is the way they treat the characters.
Yeah.
And he said, there's no one lead character. It needs to be all of them.
We gotta make it all of them.
Now, one place where I think this falls down a little bit is that in the book, they're also, I mean, I think June is the main character.
Yeah, I do too.
But you never hear one mother's story immediately followed by their daughter's story.
It's mixed up more. Yeah.
In the movie, you hear an entire family and an entire family and an entire family.
Yeah.
So the first story we hear is Lindo's story. And then the next story we hear is Waverly's story. But that doesn't happen in the book.
Right.
But what that does in the movie, it gives you the impression that Lindo is much more important than she is, and Waverly is much more important than she is.
Right, because I said to you, they're kind of making Lindo the main mother, and then like, of course, that's the first 45 minutes, and then you never really see her again until the very, very end.
Yeah. I had read something that says that they took this very episodic story and made it much more fluid. They really didn't.
No.
They turned it from being episodic into extremely episodic. It's really 4 sections of the movie.
Yeah.
It's not really a mahjong game anymore, is it? Which is a problem. Embrace the construct of the story that I learned an hour ago when I was reading about this.
Sounded great.
Yeah. So there's one other change that he decided to make.
Oh boy.
Oh, and really quickly, he also introduced the idea of bookending it with June's farewell party.
Right, because in the book, it's not her farewell party. It's just their normal Joy Luck Club meeting that they do every week or every month, I believe.
I think this is okay.
That's fine.
I don't mind that as a change.
Well, it gives it a little more stakes that they keep saying to her, well, you're leaving for China tonight.
Here's where he made his biggest mistake. And I want to read a quote from Ronald Bass.
Okay.
A lot of executives and producers are afraid of voiceovers because they say it distances the audience from the action. I felt differently. It allowed you into the inner heart of the narrator and to understand their feelings in a way you could never do in dialogue.
Strongly disagree.
Now, we have said on this podcast, we have had opinions about voiceover before.
Yes.
There have been times where it was used in a book and then used in a movie or TV show to good effect.
Handmaid's Tale.
Yes. There have been times that it existed in a book and then was not used in a movie to ill effect.
Also Handmaid's Tale.
Yes. Basically, this movie. So what I mean to say is we are not strict advocates of voiceover.
Or not voiceover. You should use it as needed to suit your story.
Was it needed to suit this story?
No.
Was it used?
Incessantly.
Excessively and incessantly. So I think you've got some stuff to say about this.
Okay. So like I said, the way that the book is structured is there's 7 first-person narrators, which is a lot. I do admit. And the way that they have dealt with this is to use voiceover to tell, especially with the mothers, but also the daughters too, whenever they're talking about anything that happened in the past, to basically narrate what's happening and to have the actual visual of what's happening physically, almost like as a dumb show. Like there's surprisingly little dialogue. And part of the reason I truly think that we're saying the actors didn't do a great job is they had so little to work with, because there are so few scenes that actually have back and forth dialogue that you can have one actor acting and playing off the other actor who's responding. There are so many moments when there's like a chunk of voiceover, the actor is kind of staring off into space, the actor will have a line, and then there will be more voiceover. So there's nothing for the actors to play play to or to do.
They're just sitting in a recording studio. Like most of their acting is done in a recording studio.
Right, and I'm literally talking about what happens on screen.
Yeah.
Is they're not getting the chance to interact with each other. It's like Waverly will say one thing to her mother and then she'll say one thing back to Waverly, and then both of them will have this voiceover.
They just stare off into the middle distance.
Right. So
can you imagine what rehearsal for this movie must have been like?
Very strange.
Awful.
And I would have loved to see so much more. There were so many moments where we turned to each other and went, something's being explained to us in voiceover, and we're going, just show that happening.
And even worse, sometimes they were showing us.
Yeah.
Like the voiceover was at best interesting.
Right.
At best interesting.
Right.
Never necessary.
No.
I don't think the voiceover was ever necessary. Then kind of in the middle, it was uninteresting, but it told you something, at least informational.
Yeah.
But at worst, it was entirely redundant.
Right. Like someone would say, I thought about how much I liked French fries. And then the character would say, I like French fries.
Yeah. No, there's one, I'm trying to remember exactly what it was. Oh, there is a scene where Waverly is taking her mother to get her hair cut.
Yeah.
To get Linda's hair
right.
cut.
This part's very good. Yeah.
Basically, Waverly is talking to the hairdresser, and the hairdresser says something to the mom, and Waverly says it back to Lindo, but so loud as if Lindo is losing her hearing.
Right.
Which she is not. And what we get in that scene is we get Lindo saying in voiceover, what does she think, I'm losing my hearing? And that's that can be acted.
She could just say, but we kind of like yelled at the screen, just turn to her and say like, I'm not deaf, or I understand you, or I speak English, any number of, or just give her a look.
I don't even think she needs to do that. I think she just needs to cringe like it's hurting her ears because she's not losing her hearing.
Right.
I think that does everything it needs to. But I think that one of the things that they probably did is I think they added voiceover where they didn't need to keep consistent voiceover through the entire movie.
Yeah.
I bet they were worried that there would be inconsistencies through the vignettes.
Yeah.
And so they needed to have all the characters talk an equal amount of time to make it feel consistent.
Yeah.
It's a huge problem.
Yeah.
Now,
it's the kind of thing that once you notice it, you can't unnotice it, and it makes it really unpleasant to watch.
I want to see a version of this movie with no voiceover.
Yeah.
Because you need some of it. But then I want to know what can be added back in. Now, in a movie where we are actively hearing the thoughts of 7 main female characters.
Yes.
Surely the female part is not underwritten.
Disagree.
My goodness.
Play the theme.
We'll find a theme at some point.
I want a theme.
Please go on.
So, it's very interesting because I do not think that the filmmakers did this on purpose. I don't think they thought about it. And I would have been very interested to see what would have happened had this been directed by a woman, a Chinese woman, or really of any ethnicity. But the fact that the film relies so heavily on voiceover, to me, had a really deleterious effect, because what it meant was that in a story about very strong women, very opinionated, very independent, very self-directed women, what you got on camera, like as you say, like if you were to remove the voiceover, what you got on camera was a lot of silence, a lot of very silent women. Not only do I find that it's just a lot of sort of women not opening their mouths and not speaking, and you're getting their thoughts, but you're not getting actions from them. You're getting what they thought about, but you're not getting them saying and doing things. And not only is that problematic in general in stories about women, but particularly about Asian and Asian American women, that is literally the cultural stereotype that women are quiet and silent and not opinionated. I feel like it does them a disservice, and it's something that the actors almost have to fight against to try to get something to happen on screen, because it really is one of those things that, like, once you notice it, you can't stop noticing that they're not actually talking to each other. There's just this voiceover continuously, and it's all different people's voiceover, but it's just so much voiceover. So that's my female characters a little underwritten.
I think that is a very cogent observation.
Thank you.
and it bothered me. I actually really appreciate it because it was bothering me through the movie, but I couldn't really articulate it. And I'm glad that you picked up on that.
Thank you.
I was honestly surprised. I will say that was a bit that we just did. But before, I kind of did assume that you wouldn't want to talk about the female character being underwritten.
Yeah.
And I was very happily surprised when you did.
Yeah.
And I like that observation. So before we finish up, I have a couple other just kind of different observations in the movie.
I do too.
Would you like to trade off a couple?
Yeah. You go first.
So one thing that I found that I thought was comical, if not entirely untrue, was in a lot of reviews for this movie, a lot of reviewers, can you guess what gender most of these reviewers were?
Boy.
Yeah. They said that the male parts were caricatures and were underwritten.
Oh no, God forbid. God forbid the white man should be underwritten.
Yeah, well, all the men.
Whatever.
Yep. So I think that's a little funny. I think this is a point where I'm perfectly willing to take a back seat on this one.
Mm-hmm.
I think that is very, very fair.
Yes.
However, I will say there are a couple of instances, one in particular,
Mm-hmm.
where I do think that a character from the book who was more interesting in the book was made more two-dimensional in the movie.
Are you talking about Harold?
I am talking about Harold.
Yes.
So Harold in the movie, who was played by Michael Paul Chan.
Yep. Who is it's that guy, like if there ever was one.
He's very good in the movie.
Yes.
I will say I don't blame him at all.
If you look him up, you will recognize him. He's been in a ton of stuff.
He's very, very good. The problem is he's the one who is kind of oblivious. He's the one who wants to split the checks evenly and makes so much more money than his wife and is kind of oblivious. In the book, the negative aspects of his character are absolutely negative.
Mm-hmm.
He is not presented as a good person.
Yeah.
But he's not presented as a villain.
He's not a monster.
Right. He is oblivious.
Yeah.
He is, which is also, I think, ignorance of kind of gender role disparity is an aspect of like toxic masculinity.
Yeah, totally.
But I think it's a little more interesting to show someone with levels and layers.
Yeah.
In the movie, he's just the worst.
He's just condescending, and he's like, I told you about this. How many times do I have to tell you again? The other thing that was super interesting that I thought was great was that in the book he's Caucasian, he's white.
Yeah.
And they made him Asian American in the movie, which is really interesting because usually it would be the other way around in terms of casting, you know?
That part I'm fine with.
No, that's fine. I just thought it was worth mentioning.
I'm okay with that. I do think it's worth mentioning. But I just don't like the way he's portrayed in it. Not because of the way he ends up looking, but I actually think it makes his wife, I think it makes Lena look worse.
Yeah, because she looks dumb.
Yeah, for being with this guy who is so obviously awful.
And her feelings about it are very dramatic. Whereas in the book, it's like, I just had this sense that something was wrong and I didn't know. In the movie, she's miserable.
Like actively miserable at him while her voiceover is happening.
Yeah.
This is one of those scenes where I said, if you just remove the voiceover, she's staring at him, despairing.
Yeah.
And he's watching some kind of TV show. I can't remember what TV show it was.
This was my favorite part of the whole movie.
I feel like all of our problems revolve around this one vignette, but please, what's your favorite part?
Okay. So Harold is in the den of their very modern architectural home, wearing still his belt and shirt and everything. I hate when characters don't put on their comfy pants. Like, it's so unrealistic in movies.
I always wear my jeans.
Yeah, but you're not wearing like a tie and your shoes.
Okay. More importantly,
anyway,
what's he watching?
He's watching a quiz show on television.
Yeah.
And you can hear people sort of being asked questions and given answers. And then it's like, okay, a generic quiz show. And then it pans to the screen and it's Jeopardy.
Yep.
Like, it's clearly Jeopardy. They got a clip from Jeopardy. And then it goes into Final Jeopardy and some music starts to play.
Well, before that, sorry to interrupt, before that, someone's talking. You hear the announcer talking.
And it's not Alex Trebek.
Not at all.
And then it goes into what is clearly Final Jeopardy, and you hear some tinkly music that is not the think music from Jeopardy. But what you're seeing on the television within the movie is Jeopardy. And it's so strange that, because I know that music is heavily trademarked, like they will go after you if you use it against their will. But they somehow were able to get the rights to show a clip, but not the audio of the television game show Jeopardy. And I just wrote in my notes in all caps, fake Jeopardy.
And I think this is an example of when writers want something, but what they want is not feasible in the production.
Yeah.
Because they wanted Jeopardy. And I think it makes sense. You're trying to show, because Harold's the kind of guy who watches the screen and just in the most smug way.
He's like shouting answers at the screen.
Yeah. And I get that. I get that they want that. But if you can't actually show the thing you want to show in the script, maybe that's the cue that you should figure out a different solution.
Yeah. So you want to talk about another change that they made in the movie?
Yes. So what we know from in the book is that from Ying Ying's past, when she was younger, she got married. He was terrible. He left her for an opera singer, and she was pregnant with his child.
Quick sidebar, another big change in the storyline. They made her husband was like old and gross in the book. In the movie, they made him dreamy.
He's very attractive.
He's very handsome.
Very handsome, but also
the worst.
a monster. So in the book, she has an abortion.
Yeah.
In the movie, she has the baby.
Mm-hmm.
And then drowns the baby.
The cutest baby you've ever seen.
And this is intensely problematic for many reasons. And we were I don't even think we have a final decision about this.
No.
I want to know so much what their thinking was, because there's so many different kind of scenarios that could have happened. One, maybe they were thinking that an abortion was more problematic than drowning a baby.
Yes, which is sort of a problematic thinking in its own right, but continue.
Maybe they thought that drowning a baby is more problematic than an abortion.
And they wanted to raise the stakes.
Maybe they thought they're basically the same.
All of those things are bad. All of those things are terrible.
Every single thing led to watching her drown a baby.
Again, cannot stress this enough. The cutest baby.
It is very dark. I basically felt like Lex in Jurassic Park when she's looking at the goat and she's like, is he gonna eat the goat?
Oh,
what's
God,
gonna happen to the goat?
baby?
And I was saying, like, what's gonna happen to the baby? Because I know the baby doesn't live.
Yeah.
Because he's not there now. Like, I know he doesn't live. And did you remember what happened?
In the book?
When we were watching it this past time, did you remember that she drowns him?
I did not remember that at all.
That was a very intense experience watching that. So that's probably one of my last notes about this.
Yeah.
But I know you had one last thing to talk about.
Yeah, just a scene that I really, really liked from the book that they it almost made me think that they had shot it for the movie and then cut it because there's a subsequent scene that references it that it's a little bit confusing if you haven't just read the book. So I almost think that they shot that scene thinking the previous scene was going to be in it. But there's a scene that June is recollecting about sort of the last, I don't know if it was Chinese New Year or what, but the last big gathering that they had with her mother when she was alive. And how she had gone to Chinatown with her to choose the crabs for the crab dinner, which, by the way, in the movie they say, my mother's famous crab, literally twice in one sentence.
Yeah.
But they're getting together with the Zhang family. So Lindo and her husband Tin and Waverly and Rich and Waverly's daughter. And the sort of tension lies in the fact that her mother has said, okay, well, there's 10 people coming, so I'll buy 11 crabs to have one extra. But she doesn't count the 4-year-old child as being a person, so they actually don't have an extra. They only have exactly enough to go around. They start to pass the platter, and there's one crab that the leg fell off, and the shop man made her take it anyway. So she said, "Oh well, that'll be the extra number 11." And there's this very well described scene where Waverly takes the first crab, and of course she puts it on her daughter's plate, who wasn't supposed to be counted in the people who needed crabs anyway. And then she takes the next best for herself and the next best for her husband, and then she passes it to her mother. And there's this amazing line that says, like, and because Waverly was her mother's daughter and had learned this skill of choosing the best for herself, her mother then took all of the best for the next people. And then there was the old piano teacher that needed the best, and then it was just down to June and her mother, and June tried to take the one with the missing leg, and her mother said, no, take the other one. And then she didn't even eat the one with the missing leg. She knew it wasn't good. It had gone bad. And they have this conversation afterwards that and this happens in the movie too, but you don't see the first scene where all of the the crab choosing takes place. June says to her, you know, I'm never going to be the daughter you want me to be, and I'm a disappointment, and I'm not successful. And she says, the mother says to her, Waverly is the kind of person that takes the best for herself. You're the kind of person that takes the worst for herself. And that's, I'm getting choked up saying this, because you take worst quality for yourself because you have the best quality heart. And it's an amazing scene. It's so good. And in the book and in the movie, but
okay.
it falls a little short in the movie because you don't know what happened to prompt that conversation. Yeah. And I wish they had left in that entire episode with the crabs from beginning to end. I wish they had left the whole thing in because it's important.
That's how I felt about a lot of this. Like, one final thing about what makes me cry is that the end of the movie, when June gets to China and meets her sisters, and they're standing there on the dock waiting for her, and she runs up to them and they have their moment. By the way, one thing they changed in the book, basically they've written to her, the aunties have written to these two daughters, pretending to be Suyun.
Yeah.
Suyun. And they don't tell her that she's dead.
Right.
And June basically says to Lindo, like,
in the book, she says this.
You are gonna write them and tell them that. It is wrong.
It is cruel. It is wrong, yeah.
For you to not tell them and to have me do it when I get there.
Yeah, they're expecting her. Tell them she's not coming.
And she convinces them and they do write them.
Yeah.
So when she gets there, they know.
Yeah.
And it's this really beautiful scene because they don't have to say anything.
Yeah.
No one has to say anything. They all know that she's dead and they know that they are family. And they embrace. And I'm not crying right now, which is crazy. I didn't expect to be able to talk about this without crying.
Yeah.
But this is what gave me I cried intensely when I was reading the book. And then in the movie, they do the scene, and I cried intensely because I remembered what was in the book.
Right.
Not because of what was on screen.
Well,
because she has to tell them that their mother is dead, and the scene doesn't become this beautiful kind of wordless reunion. Now it becomes exposition.
Yeah.
And it's not good.
Well, the thing that happens in the book that is not in the movie that I also wish that they had done is that right before she goes to China, or I think they're maybe already there, her father is explaining to her the meaning of the twins' names and her name. So he says their names in Chinese mean spring rain and spring flower because one was born first and the rain comes before the flower. Mm-hmm. And he says, you know, your mother was like a poet. Isn't that beautiful? And she's like, yeah, it's fine. And he says, your name, Jing Mei. Jing means like something rare, something precious. And Mei, and he kind of, it's kind of this throwaway, like, oh, that's common, like Mei Mei, little sister. And you don't realize until the end that she comes to meet them and they're calling out Mei Mei, little sister, little sister. And her mother called her that because she's the little sister. She never, do you know what I mean?
And there I go. I am actively crying right now. I love the end of this book.
Yeah.
I love it so much.
I'm crying too.
I'd rather end there. I had like other little funny things I thought I would bring up, but I think it is more appropriate that we end there.
Also, you're crying and the vein in your forehead is standing out.
I'm crying. So I loved this book.
Yeah.
And there are parts of this movie that I love.
Yeah.
This is not a bad movie. This is a good movie.
Yeah.
That has lots of problems.
It's funny that I feel like the director knew how to do sort of these epic shots of like the Chinese countryside and the mountains and the people with their wheelbarrows fleeing the town. All that looked great, and he can't shoot two people having a conversation.
Yeah.
It's really odd that way.
I think that's a good observation.
Yeah.
Yeah. But that brings us to the end of Amy Tan's The Joy Luck Club.
This is great. I recommend reading the book at least, definitely.
Yeah. So we should figure out where to put this on the quadrants.
Yeah, I mean, it has to come down on it was made by people who care about it because Amy Tan herself was one of the screenwriters.
Yeah, and Wayne came to her and said, I want to make this into a movie.
Yeah.
I love this book. I want to make this into a movie.
Yeah.
I don't think anyone involved directly didn't care about this.
Yeah, I don't believe so.
Maybe Ronald Bass. I'm not sure.
Think about how different it could have been.
Oh, yes.
Think about how they could have changed it. Think about how exploitative and awful and racist it could have been.
Yes.
And they did not do that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, nothing on that subject relates to any problems that we had.
No, is literally how the movie was shot.
That's it.
Yep.
How it was constructed, how it was written.
Yeah.
That's really it.
The screenplay, the structure, the dramaturgy of the screenplay and how it was shot.
So as far as whether it was successful or not, I think we have to look at it two ways.
Yeah.
It was successful.
It gets a lot of points for the fact that it was made at all.
Mm-hmm. However, it's right on the line.
Yeah, I agree. I was going to say on the line for me.
Yeah. So I think it's made by people who care about it, but it's right on the line between successful and unsuccessful.
I agree.
So that brings us to the end.
Doing this podcast with you was my long cherished wish.
Awesome. Great. So, and here I go. All right. So Adapter Parish is on the web at adapterparishcast.com. We're also on Twitter and Instagram at AdaptCast, and you can join our groups on Facebook and Goodreads, and you can also find and follow me on Letterboxd. If you have anything to say that's longer than a tweet, you can always send an email to us at adapterparishcast@gmail.com. We just remember, we made disclaimers at the beginning about how we were treating this episode, so if you have any problems, be kind to us because we want to be kind.
Feel free to add us, but maybe not about pronunciation.
Yes, please. Absolutely. Absolutely. Now, if you'd like to support the show, on the other side of things, if you'd like to support the show, there are two great ways you can do it. First, tell a friend. If you have anyone that you know who gets as intensely passionate about voiceover in movies made of books they love as we do, please let them know about it.
If they have hard opinions about ADR, they're the people we want for this podcast.
Oh, goodness, yes. Oh, my goodness, yes. Second, a rating and review on your podcast platform of choice would be greatly appreciated. We are on iTunes, we are on Stitcher, we are on Google Play. A rating and a review does so much for this little show.
Absolutely.
That brings us to the end. So we'll talk to everybody in a couple of weeks.
Bye.
See ya.